Just needed to mix it up a little bit. So are whiskey tasting notes? Yes. Yes. Sort of. There's a book that if you haven't read it, you should read it. And it's called Proof. And it's written by a guy named Adam Rogers, The Science of Booze. And it's a great book. I've now read it 5 or 6 times. I read it every couple of years. It is one of the books that actually is one of the reasons I started whiskey marketing school. I started reading this book and it started pricking some things and making me go, I wonder. This book was the beginning of me thinking of the whiskey marketing school. Particularly, there's a chapter in it called Smell and Taste. And he goes into all of these studies about the science of smell and taste and how much direct one-to-one molecule understanding of the components of a spirit wine or a spirit is effectively and meaningless. He talks about there's countless studies that show that experts in tasting, like highly trained wine sommeliers, are only marginally better at identifying in a blind study or a blind tasting things than a relative amateur with a little bit of coaching. And we're talking about blind, right? It also turns out that the one skill set that seems to separate the pros from the amateurs is actually just repetition and training and pattern recognition. Now that shouldn't be a surprise, but it's not this objective, like I pick up this and objectively there's pears and fruit and honey and, right? So over and over the studies he talks about in this book are that when people were given single identifier notes of like, here's a smell that's licorice, here's a smell that's strawberry, here's a smell that's plum, here's one that's honey, that pretty accurately everyone across the board could be like, oh, that's licorice, honey, vanilla, so on. But when they started combining them in more intricate combinations of 2 or 3 smells, it only took about 3 or 4 combinations before almost no one could pinpoint what was in a thing. That's crazy. That sort of, in theory, could screw with entire industries and destroy the relevance of all of these whiskey review channels talking about all of these things. And that, but that's not the whole story. But what it should do is, if you find it hard to pick out all these things that all these whiskey people talk about, you're not wrong. It's hard, and it's not entirely intuitive, and it's more based on expectations and historical pattern recognition than on any kind of objective reality of assessment. So, here's what I mean. When an expert picks up something and smells, they're not blindly taking a glass and just analyzing it like some spectrograph or like some chemical analysis. What they're doing is taking the pre-existing patterns that they've built in their head for these things, and they are holding it up against it. A/B comparing. This, is it like this? No. Is it like this? No. Is it like this? Yes. What is that? Pear. Okay, I think this might be pear in this. Right? But that only works if you have really, really well crafted fundamental patterns in your head with which to A/B compare. You can't just pull that out of your hat, right? And in wine guys, what they'll find over and over and over is that if something stays within the classical definition of, say, a Pinot, or let's say a Merlot, right? There's sort of a classical definition of like, here are the qualities of a Merlot. If something lives in that, then the experts can be really good at going, that's a Merlot and here's where it's from. But as soon as you start getting weird blends or weird off variations of a Merlot, but from a weird region and it's not presenting like a Merlot, if you do it blind, you can fool all the experts all the time. This is true. All whiskey people know this. When we're doing anything in the vault, one of the funnest things we did as a group was just randomly go in there, have someone pull a bottle, not tell you what it is, and then have you drink. I got fooled last week by somebody who poured me something, and I was like, this is the weirdest Compass box I've ever had in my life, because they were holding a bottle of Compass box, they set it on the bar, and they gave me this whiskey, and I was like, wow, this is a really remarkable variation of this Compass box. I don't remember it tasting like this, but it's really good. And then you came back later and he was like, oh, that's not Compass box. I poured you something else. I brought this Compass box over for a different reason. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a relief because I thought my brain was broken. But I never doubted at first that it was Compass box. I just thought, well, this must be a weird one. Everybody can be misled that way. So how do you, if that's true and you're that fallible, what's the point of studying? What's the benefit, and how do you even use your nose? I'll tell you. First, we're going to drink Powers. Now, I am drinking this one because this doesn't exist anymore, and in the new line of Powers that they've released to the world, the bottlings don't even look like this. I think this is a discontinued product. I got it locally. You can't find it anymore, but it's almost gone. And this is one of my favorite ones we had in the vault. And I wanted to share it with you guys before it was gone completely. So you're indulging me a little bit. But this is the Powers signature release. And all it is their classic pot still and a mix of barrel types from sherry to bourbon. Oh, man. See, this is why I wanted to share it. It's everything you love about the vanilla cream and berries in a Scottish whiskey and that sort of shortbread note. But there's also this like strong fruit pastry getting almost all the way to a pie. It's so rich. And I don't know how long we've had this bottle, but it is still holding up. Okay. Oh, yes. This to me is one of the best examples of what Powers does well when it does it really well, which is this long, oily, viscous buttercream pastry wrapped around fruit with a little bit of citrus, but mostly fruit. And this is why Powers is one of my favorite whiskeys from Ireland. Okay. I really should have gotten like the John's Lane or something, but I finished off a John's Lane over the weekend, and the John's Lane is way more shortbready and dusty cookie and less fruit. This is way more fruit. If I ever find anything like it and it's regularly available, I will tell you, because I find this one to be kind of unique in the Powers lineup. So sorry about that. So first, let's talk about smell. All your other senses do not go direct into your brain for understanding and patterns and functional. They have an intermediary that receives the data and then reports to the brain. So your eyes have cones that view various wavelengths and spectrums. They take that data and then they feed it to the brain. Your touch, taste, there's all intermediary connective tissue. Your nose does not have an intermediary. It picks up actual physical molecules of the thing that you're smelling, which is why it's so weird to smell bad things, because you're actually just inhaling a piece of a molecule of that thing. And it takes that data and reports it directly to the brain. It goes straight through. The sensors that feed it go straight through to the part of your brain responsible for memory and emotion with no intermediary and pattern recognition, because memory is pattern recognition, right, and emotion. And that's why smell has this visceral, strong impact on you. It's also why it's really, really hard to deduce things, because the right brain doesn't really read fact and fiction and reality and non-reality. It just reads pattern recognition and shape and motion, right? So when you smell, you're creating patterns. You're going, first you're recognizing, so you'll smell and your brain's going, what does this remind me of? I've seen this before. I know what this is. And there's another study that's not in this book that talks about a thing that was found, which is effectively if you lack the language for something, then your brain effectively ignores it. It's a very weird thing. So if your brain can't wrap words around an experience, your brain just ignores the experience completely or reclassifies it as something totally different because it doesn't have a word to describe this new thing. And so one of the things you're doing when you're smelling, this is why it's really great to have like a tasting wheel, like the Scotch tasting wheel, or Nancy Fraley did a tasting wheel for whiskey, or the wine ones are a great start if you can't get anything else, is because oftentimes what you can do with your brain is smell and then take the list of language of things that you've experienced and remind yourself, oh yeah, these are all things that I've tasted. Plum? No, it's not that. Seaweed? No, not that. Is it raisins? No, not that. Is it vanilla bean? Oh, maybe, yeah, right? And what you're doing is you're helping your right brain gain language for its experience that it's getting on the nose. This is why when you're in a tasting and someone goes, I smell this, sometimes you go, oh, yes, me too, because your brain just got language for an experience and went, yep, 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 that's it, and recognized it. So the difference between amateur and pro is that the pros do this constantly. They write things down, they smell, they write more things down, they compare it to other things, they write more things down, they repeat it, they write things down, and they build an entire catalog of recognizable scents and tastes into their brain. And then when they pick this up, they're not comparing it to a tasting wheel on a sheet of paper they downloaded from the internet, they're comparing it to the tasting list in their brain and all the patterns that they've created. So this is something that only works with time, yes? But you can be very easily fooled if I didn't know what this bottle was and all I was brought was a black container and poured into it, because what your brain really wants more than anything is conclusions. Your brain's job is to, as fast as possible, understand the data that's coming into it and come to a conclusion as to whether or not it needs to take action in some way. And so the whole time your right brain's going like, ooh, what is this? This could be anything. Your left brain is going, we're going to figure it out. We need to know what it is. Let's take action. And the longer you can put off your left brain from coming to a conclusion, the more accurate you're going to be on your experience, assuming you've built the patterns. This happens to me, and by the way, I maybe have tasted more different distilleries in the world than most people that you've ever met. This happens to me constantly, where on a blind tasting, if I'm really open, I'll write down all the things I'm experiencing. And then I'll decide, here's what I think this is. And I would say I'm probably 50-50 on an accurate, here's what that conclusion is. But I'm like 90% plus on my analysis of what I'm experiencing. And that's the difference between just living in right brain and then forcing the left brain to come to a conclusion. If you just experience it and go, what does this remind me of? You can be really accurate. But the moment you start going, here's what I think this is, you start closing doors. And it's very easy to come to a wrong conclusion by emphasizing one thing too strong. One of the most impressive times I've ever experienced that was watching Eric Waite, and I brought him one of our really young malts from Crowded Barrel, and he picked it up, and he went, that's malt, yes. And then he went, wow, it tastes like it has a really high barrel impact, or smells like a really high barrel impact, but also smells like really young, new-makey malt. Yes. Absolutely. And it smells kind of charred and aggressively marshmallow vanillins. Yeah, so heavy barrel impact, but short amount of time. And he went, man, I would say that this is like a really young malt from a high heat area, maybe a Texas or a New Mexico direction where you get this, you don't get this. And I'm just sitting there going like, well done, sir. And then at the end, he said, I think this might be this or this. And both of them are wrong. He didn't know it was ours. Now, that's not on Eric. We hadn't even released a malt at this point, so he had no idea. But son of a bitch, if all of his assessments weren't 100% on the money, right? But then you go to, oh, I'm going to make a proclamation. And then it's like, you may or may not be right. That's experts. That's novices. This is a world that if you're going to get into, remember that you are so fallible. Your tastes and your impact of your nose, it changes by time of day, what you've eaten, how you feel, whether you have a cold, what room you're in, what music you're listening to. It's that flexible. And so hold your opinions loosely when you're like, I hate this, or I love this, or this is bull. Just be careful, because we're all human beings. We're all extremely fallible, but it's still worth the exploration. It's still worth the study. It's still worth the adventure. And also remember that the point of whiskey, really, is to enjoy it. And for it to be the thing that guides you into closer relationship and more humanity and more community. Yeah? Which is why I'm really glad you're here. Cheers to you.